Welcome back to the Vanessa G Fitcast. I'm Vanessa Pozos, and here with me is Omar Pozos, my husband and co-host. And Omar, let's start out with how are you doing? I feel like we haven't done just like a how you doing in a little while.
I'm a little cold this morning. We went cold plunging, and I was just laughing. If you guys are watching us on the YouTube, you're in a tank top and I'm in a hoodie, so I'm a little cold. But other than that, I'm feeling good. We had a weekend where we were traveling a little all over the place with just work and stuff. But other than that, I'm excited to dive back into work this week. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm doing a lot better than I was last week. and that's actually a little bit of what I want to talk about today. So, like Omar had just mentioned, last week we were traveling. So we went to a business conference in Nashville.
Nash Vegas, as they call it.
Who calls it that?
I do.
I've never heard that before. But yes, we went to Nashville, or Nash Vegas, apparently, as Omar calls it. And so we were there for a couple days for a business conference, and then we had planned to stay an extra day as well, just for like a little mini vacation day, since we don't do that very often. Most of our travel is for work these days. But taking it back to last week, so prior to our travel, so we were leaving on Wednesday morning, kind of early in the morning. So anytime where we're going to be traveling and kind of out of the business for a couple of days, that means we, as business owners, it's kind of hard to like truly step away from the business. You're always kind of in it. So typically that means that we end up trying to cram a full weeks of work just into the days that we have. So I think that Monday and Tuesday we had some pretty long days of work, and I remember, because I'm like, every single time we travel, I'm always like, I'm going to, really make sure I get all my stuff done early so I can pack and go to sleep early and be rested to go to the airport.
Every single time we're traveling.
Every single time. It never happens. And yeah, so I think last week we were and I say have to loosely. There's nothing that we have to do. Everything is a choice by, of course, like nobody's saying, like there's no one, holding us hostage saying you have to work right now. It's us. We're the ones holding ourselves hostage, telling ourselves we have to work because we choose to, because we do love what we do. But that being said, sometimes we, I think, push a little bit hard. And, 2 weeks ago, so about 2 weeks from the time we're recording, I had COVID, and it took me down pretty hard. And we were in the middle of, doing a lot of interviews for some hiring for some positions, and I had a lot going on. And I was like, you know what, I'm not really going to take off. I'm going to kind of push through here a little bit because I want to stay on the timeline that I'm trying to stay on with hiring right now, knowing that we were going to be traveling the following week. And so, we had some long work days that week. And, on top of just having COVID, I was feeling pretty run down, pretty tired, kind of just like getting through. And then that weekend, kind of same thing. We had to kind of not have to, but we chose to kind of work through the weekend a little bit because we were going to be traveling Wednesday morning. And so long story short, kind of found myself, I guess, this was about a week and a half after first testing positive for COVID. I felt like suddenly I had felt like I'd passed it, but then suddenly as we were traveling, I was like, man, I am feeling super fatigued again. And I was feeling like a lot of brain fog, a lot of just not quite feeling the best there for a minute. And I was like, that's weird. Like I felt like I completely recovered. I felt like I was better. Why am I suddenly not feeling the best anymore? And the thing is, ultimately, I found on that trip that kind of trying to cram this story a little bit shorter instead of getting too long-winded here. Basically, it did not end up becoming my favorite trip. For the majority of the conference, probably half the conference, I would say probably 50% of it, I was pretty much just in a hotel room, just kind of by myself, either working or just sleeping and just trying to like get away from people, which is not really like me. I love going to these kinds of conferences. I enjoy really networking with other people. And I did not feel like myself. I felt super anxious and just really started to have a lot of social anxiety where I felt like I just could not be around people, did not want to be around people. So normally, we're in a conference room all day and doing a lot of networking, a lot of kind of group breakout sessions. And then in the evenings, we might go to dinner with a group and, sometimes even go out to like a bar or something afterwards or go back to the hotel bar and hang out. And I wanted none of that at all. And so essentially, kind of in like looking back on things, I can kind of see what ultimately happened there. When your body is fighting a virus, when your body has a lot of inflammation going on, because it is fighting a virus, even if it is after you feel like you felt better, your body is still in a recovery process. It's kind of playing catch up a little bit. And when you're in that state where you are fighting a lot of inflammation, you are going to have a much higher propensity for anxiety. It is just simply a physiological response as your nervous system is really heightened as it's working hard to really get you back to that healthy state. And if you add in on top of it, of course, like I was saying, had some longer work days, was choosing to push a little bit harder. And then, of course, with a travel day, stayed up later. And then to finish things up, finish packing, and then got up early to head to the airport. Physiologically, my body was fatigued and my body was run down. So it makes sense kind of where I ended up spiraling a little bit. And you kind of get to the other side, like once we got home and, back into more normal routines and started to feel better, you kind of look back and you're like, whoa, like what even happened there? Like that, you kind of like look back and you're like, that did not even feel like me. And that's, I think, what a lot of people can probably resonate with if they have dealt with anxiety and or depression or different types of, propensities for mood disorders. It's something that I don't like to talk about often. Just being honest with you guys, I feel like, I tend to get in my head a little bit of if I talk about mental health troubles that I've had, it feels like that would discredit me as a coach, being able to help people with their health. And ultimately I definitely have a little bit more of that desire to not share when I struggle with anxiety or depression. But I shared a little bit about it on my Instagram stories the other day. And I had so many, responses from different people saying like, I really appreciate you sharing this because I resonate with this so much. Like this is really relatable. And it was just a little bit of a reminder for me that there are so many people who struggle with anxiety or depression or both, or, other types of mood disorders and mental health issues that don't really have an opportunity to connect with other people who struggle with the same thing. And I think as humans, we tend to almost start to identify with these types of mental health concerns to where ultimately we can almost cause it to intensify more and more because we start to believe that that's who we are. And we try and hide it from other people because we're afraid of being judged for, talking about feeling anxious and different things. And that's where you can find yourself just feeling really alone and really struggling with this stuff in the dark. And I don't want any of my listeners to find themselves feeling that way. So I hope that with this episode, you'll feel a little bit more seen, a little bit more connected to somebody else, and be able to see that, hey, you can still reach your goals. You can still be, a high performer. You can still be successful, even if you have a propensity for anxiety, depression, or anything like that.
Yeah, man. I'm very proud of you for sharing that because I could see your eyes were tearing up a little bit as you were sharing that. And I know it's not easy or fun to talk about these things. And what also Vanessa didn't share that I'll kind of give a bit of a glimpse into our relationship. This is something that we've struggled with as a relationship or as a couple for a little while. Like we'll have days where we're not feeling so great. We're both pushing. We're both around each other every single day, 24/7. And at times, things like this can really, cause friction, cause struggles, cause tension within the relationship. When we were in Nashville, like my expectations were a little bit different. And we had been pushing a little bit. And I felt I never got properly tested for COVID. And I don't think I did have it, but Vanessa had it. So I more than likely probably had it myself. But anyways, I was feeling pretty run down. So I was like, okay, cool. We'll go to Nashville. We're, going to go out, have some fun, interact with people. And I'm a lot more social than you, I would say, babe. Like
you're a little more extroverted than I am.
My social battery kind of runs a little bit longer. So, with her not feeling super well, I was like, well, for me as a husband and just who I am as a person, I'm like, I like to be a fixer. And I'm like, okay, well, if you feel XYZ way, like how can we fix it like right away? And unfortunately, it just doesn't work like that. But what I think is super cool, and I'm excited for you to share, Ness, is just what you can do as a person to try and help, to try and, if anything, decrease the chances of you going through situations like this. Because even as a couple, or if you're at a conference or with your family, it doesn't just impact you as the person, it impacts everybody else that you're around. And I can imagine with you seeing that impact, it probably causes more anxiety, it probably causes more stress for the person too. So yeah, this is something that I think as we grow as a couple, it's something that's becoming very near and dear to my heart because, it's something that you're right. I think a lot of people go through it alone. And if there's something that you can help fix this or increase the chances of you feeling better by like a couple percentage points, I'm like, that's huge. And it makes a big impact in people's lives.
Yeah. It's so, oh my gosh, we could like have an entire conversation around like the relationship side of these types of, mental health concerns where it's like if one person in the relationships, like in our example, I'm the person who has more of that propensity to struggle with anxiety and depression. And we've had conversations in the past where you're like, I don't really know what that feels like. You're like, I've never,
like for me, I don't know what it feels. Yeah,
you're like, I've never really dealt with that. So that makes it really hard because you can see when I'm struggling and when we are, we spend like pretty much all of our time together. Of course, like how I feel affects you and how you feel affects me.
Yeah.
And as much as we know that we are in charge of how we feel, like the other does not, neither of us is in charge of the other person's feelings. We both care about each other and we both don't want to see each other struggling. So it can absolutely be this like negative feedback loop where I start to, it probably starts with me where I start to get anxious and depressed. And then that starts to kind of affect you because you just want to fix it, but you don't really know what it feels like. You don't really know how to fix it. And it's not, those who have struggled with these things, although we're going to talk here in this episode about how to really mitigate anxiety and overwhelm and depression and these types of tendencies.
That's the word I was looking for, mitigate, not decrease or help.
Yeah, we're going to talk about, strategies that I personally use, but, those who have struggled with it know that, especially when you're in it, if you really get into like a period of more almost like clinical anxiety, clinical depression, whether or not you've been diagnosed, you kind of know the difference between just like a little bit here and there. And like when you're like in it could be for a few hours, a few days, it could be, whatever period of time. When you're in it, it's so hard to just pull yourself out of it. You have to almost just kind of wait for the storm to pass a little bit. And that's really hard for the people around you to be like, okay, we're just going to like wait for the storm to pass. Like, your loved ones, especially, I think a lot of men are more of like the fixers and they want to just kind of fix it. And that can create a lot of frustration for both parties for sure. But, so overall, really what, to provide enough context here for that situation. So when we went to Nashville, the first day was kind of that travel day, was feeling a little tired, different things, but, was really excited to be there. I love these kinds of events. I love getting to learn and getting to, really work on our business and getting to network with other business owners and different things like that. But I remember kind of by the end of that first day, with it being the early morning flight and then, some different networking we did throughout that day, I remember that night, like, gosh, I am just so tired. I'm excited. I'm happy to be here, but I am so just physically tired. And then the next day, which was the first day of the conference itself, that's when I started to feel not just tired, but physically just fatigued. Like really just, oh my gosh, like you feel like you're just carrying a weight around in your body. And at the same time, I started to get a lot of brain fog. Like I just felt like my thoughts were really slow. I just felt like it was just like not quite fully there, not quite fully on it. And you kind of need to be on it in these types of situations to get the most out of it with networking and with, like these kind of workshops that we're doing with other business owners. So that in and of itself can start to feel stressful because you're like getting in your head about the fact that you're like, oh my gosh, I'm not feeling sharp here. Oh no, like how am I going to be perceived? You start.
And then on top of that too, I mean, you kind of shared a little bit, but you were also going through like a hiring process and trying to hire, new positions in the business. And we have obviously a business that still continues to move forward, whether or not we're there. So it's, I think at times, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there's the stress of you not being present at the conference and being like, oh no, I'm not participating, I'm not engaging, or I just feel fatigued. And then on top of that, you're like, I could be home and be doing all these things. Does that ever happen?
Absolutely. There's just like that, like, I don't really want to be here right now, even though I want to be here. I don't want to be here because there's other stuff that I feel like I need to do and I want to do. And that's just like creating a lot of anxiety because it's kind of that like looming over my head of like, but I need to do this. I want to do this. And there's other things happening outside of the conference that like is also a priority for me. So that was like day one. I just remember by the end of that day of like the conference itself, it wrapped up around like 5:00 and everybody's like, you're starting to make plans for dinner and what we're going to do tonight. And I think I turned to Omar. I was like, I need to go take a nap. I was like, I need to go lay down. And so I went back to the room and I laid down, and it was like, once I got to the room, it was like, yeah, I'm not leaving. I'm not leaving the room tonight. So I didn't go to dinner. Omar went to dinner and, still went out and was able to network. And so there's part of me that then is now getting in my head of like the FOMO of like, oh, but like, I want to be, out there with people connecting and different things, but I feel like I can't right now. So I had to give myself that permission to take a step back and just kind of rest a little bit more that night, hoping that just by, not going out and going to bed a little bit earlier, hoping that the next day I would feel better. Well, then day 2 comes around. This is the second and final day of like the conference itself. And I felt worse. I felt like at this point, I was starting to feel like really kind of dizzy. Like when we were in the conference room, we'd be sitting at the table and there were like these, lights overhead in the room. And I remember like I just kept like finding myself looking at the lights and feeling like my eyes were like my vision was kind of a little bit funky. And like anytime we'd stand up, I would just get a little bit lightheaded and dizzy. And I just felt like I could not pay attention to what people were saying. Like people would start to have a conversation with me. I felt like I could not follow what they were saying. And then when it was like my turn to speak, I felt like I could not come up with words. Like you kind of just start to feel like you cannot hold a conversation. And again, that starts to create more anxiety because now you're starting to, again, worry about how you're being perceived. And we're very fortunate that we are kind of in a position where, within this kind of business networking group, we have kind of made names for ourselves. We've have one of the more successful businesses in this group. And so a lot of people tend to want to kind of come up to us and ask us questions, introduce themselves. And I love that. I love getting to connect with people. At the same time, though, in that kind of a position, those types of days, it can be a little bit stressful when you have people now coming up to you and kind of introducing yourself and like ready to have a conversation. And I'm in the moment of like, I can't hold a conversation right now. And so now I'm starting to feel even more just run down and kind of almost freaking out a little bit. So then people, are starting to come up to me and like I felt like I couldn't hold a conversation, and that starts to feel stressful in and of itself because again, you're kind of worried about how you're being perceived, right? And I just ultimately almost felt like as we were sitting there, I felt like disassociated from my body a little bit. I just was not present. I was not fully there. And so that's where around lunchtime, I was like, all right, I've got to go lay down. I need to like take a quick power nap, and hopefully that's all I need to come back and feel better. And again, I went back to the room, laid down, and was pretty instantly like, I don't think I'm going to be able to leave the room. Like I just feel like instant, a little bit more relief being out of the group. I feel like just being in a group of people, I was in that anxiety mode where, a lot of anxiety in your brain is going to start to trigger this like fight or flight or freeze or hide kind of response in your body. It's a nervous system response. And I was feeling that when I was in the group. It was like flight response immediately. Could not just sit still and like be present and talk to people. It was like, I need to get out of here. And then as I got to the room, oh my gosh, I'm like getting emotional. And then I was like, I would get to the room and I would then feel like I just needed to hide. But then it's like, as you feel like you're hiding, now you're getting in your head over the fact that you're like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm so rude that I'm just like not even around other people. And in these types of, like this conference specifically, I had just a little while before that been asked to, our business coaches who were running the conference, they were going to record an ad, and they asked if I would kind of like say a line in it, be part of it. And I had said yes. And then I was, getting stressed because I think you had called me and said they're about to record the ad. Are you going to come back down? And I was like, I can't do it. And so then I'm getting in my head over the fact that I'm like, oh my gosh, I just bailed on them when they asked me to do this. And then, shortly after, you and I were supposed to speak on a expert panel. Yeah. Oh my gosh, I don't know why I'm getting so emotional here. We were supposed to speak on an expert panel, and then kind of same thing where then I think you actually came up to the room at that point and you're like, are you okay? Like, do you still want to speak on the panel? And I just was like, I cannot do it. And at the same time that I'm like, I know that I cannot do it. It would be a really bad idea for me to try and go and do that with how I'm feeling right now. I'm getting more in my head over the fact that like, I'm telling myself stories now about the fact that I'm like, oh my gosh, everybody probably thinks I'm so rude, and people probably think this and think that, which is not true. The reality is nobody probably even notices. Like nobody really cares about what I'm doing or not doing. But it's when you're already in that anxious state, of course your thoughts are going to spiral. And so that's where ultimately found myself then like staying in the room again for the rest of the day until we finally went downstairs and got dinner. And even during the dinner, I think I just sat there in silence, and I was just like, okay, I'm just going to focus on eating my food. It's okay. I'm just going to like listen to other people's conversations. But yeah, so ultimately that's where I just want to share these things so that those who struggle with this stuff as well know that they're not alone in this, because a lot of people struggle with this stuff in the dark and don't really share about it. And, I have chosen throughout my life to not medicate for any of these types of things. There's no shame for anybody who does choose to medicate for anxiety or depression. I at the end of the day, really choose to manage my anxiety and depression via healthy habits that I have found that really work for me. And I really, really enjoy getting to work with our clients to find the right kind of habits that help them. And if ultimately they have a goal of coming off of a medication like this, we've been able to support them through that and be able to really eliminate or mitigate anxiety, depression, overwhelm via these kinds of lifestyle habits. So all of that to say, a very long intro.
I feel like I need to give you a hug, babe.
Oh,
I love
gosh.
you.
All of that to say, very long intro, but I just want to share a little bit of what are some of the things that I personally do to help manage my kind of propensity for anxiety and depression and keep it at bay. Because the reality is, prior to this past week, I hadn't had an experience like this in many, many months. And I do believe that it comes down to the fact that I have gotten my hormones and my gut health into a great spot. I am currently working through a little bit of gut stuff that has popped back up, and I think that's probably also contributed to kind of this little like outbreak in anxiety. But for those of you who do maybe find yourself with a propensity for anxiety and depression, what can you do to help manage it? So these are going to be my 7 kind of go-to healthy habits, and I'll explain a little bit about kind of why I do these and how these things ultimately work for me.
Go for it. What you got for us?
So the first one is I like to use a sauna and cold plunge a few times a week. My goal is to do 3 to 4 times a week. Realistically, that probably looks like 2 to 3 times a week. Sometimes if things are going on, it might be 0 to 1, but the goal is 3 to 4. And the reason I like to do this is because, and those who have experienced cold plunging especially, but I really like to pair sauna and cold plunge together, these things force you to get out of your head and into your body. And when we're talking about mood disorders and a lot of these kinds of like mental health.
Can you talk a little bit about that for a second? Like, what is forcing you to get out of your head and into your body really feel like? Or just describe your experience. Like we went this morning. What did that feel like for you?
Yeah. So it's like when you are in these really high temperatures in a sauna, or on the flip side, you're in a very cold temperature in the cold plunge. It's forcing you to actually focus on your body and really be in your body, not just in your head, just like thinking and like really being in your thoughts. Mm-hmm. You have to kind of focus a little bit on your breath. You have to focus a little bit more on just on your body.
Like the physiology, is that how you say it, right? Yeah. Physiological aspect of your body. Like how are you feeling and stuff. Yeah.
Yep. And there is just research on like the physiological response that happens within the body. It is very, very, like the cold plunge especially is very, very actually calming for the nervous system. So if you are kind of living in a place of like a heightened nervous system, doing a plunge can help you get out of that, because essentially it like has this immediate reaction where at first it sends you sympathetic dominant, meaning more that fight or flight, but it immediately causes your body to kind of like initiate that vagus nerve and really calm your body down. So that's where people say you can really find this like intense feeling of calm in a cold plunge. Mm-hmm. So that's why I like to do that one a few times a week. I also like to go for silent outdoor walks. And when I say silent outdoor walks, I used to, like back in the day, you would never see me on a walk without headphones in my ears, like multitasking, listening to a podcast, listening to an audiobook,
memos.
Sending voice memos, like talking with clients, things like that. And I still do that as well. Like I mix those things in, but my goal is to always have at least one, it doesn't even have to be super long, but at least one silent outdoor walk where, I'll take our dog Zoe out for a little walk. And within that, she's of course likes to stop and pee like every 5 steps. And that's honestly a good thing. It's good for my nervous system to just kind of like stroll along, take a pause. We're not on like a power walk, and I'm just relaxed and I'm just kind of thinking. I'm just in my thoughts a little bit. So essentially just going for these kinds of outdoor walks are very calming, because you do essentially, you're getting into your thoughts a little bit, but in a different way, to where, so like I was talking about the sauna and the cold plunge, it gets you out of your head and into your body. Going for that walk, it's kind of giving your body a very calming thing to do. So it kind of allows your brain to just like settle down a little bit, and it gives you an opportunity to like sort through your thoughts a little bit more. At least that's my experience, and part of why I really like it is just going for that walk and just feeling like I'm more so present. I'm noticing things around me, as well as just kind of like maybe thinking in a way that's a little bit more of a calming state. It's not quite so rushed and like, oh my gosh, I'm thinking about I need to do this, I need to do that, different things. It's just we're kind of just in the moment a little bit more.
Yeah. One of the things that I feel, and I think I've shared this with you, but if I'm behind my desk and I'm like, oh my God, this email didn't get sent or this task didn't get done. And I feel like that just takes over. And it's like the epitome of like my world. I'm like, the world's going to die if I don't send this email now. Then I go for a walk and I'm like, I changed my environment. I'm like, this isn't that big of a deal. Like, it's going to get done. It'll be fine. You know, nobody's going to die because you don't send that email within the next 10, 15 minutes. And it just allows me to be like, there's so much more to the world, to my life than just sitting behind my computer. So that in itself helps me a ton.
Yeah. Our work is very important to us because we care about it. And, you know, at the end of the day, we do take it very seriously. But at the end of the day, we don't have to take it that seriously. And sometimes we have to take a step back and be like, hey, nobody is going to die. You know, the business is going to keep moving forward regardless of whether we do this email right now in this moment or, you know, if we get to it tomorrow, like that's okay too.
Yeah. Or the other perspective too. And we share this a lot with, you know, the busy moms, the women that are putting others, you know, first. I'm like, well, what happens if you have, in this case, a severe, you know, a depression or severe anxiety, like, and you have to go to like, you know, an institution or a hospital. I'm like, you're not going to send any emails there. So you might as well prioritize your health now so we don't get to that point, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Number 3 on my kind of go-to health habits. So this one is simply to wake up earlier and go to bed earlier. It has to be both. It can't really be just waking up earlier because I will also find myself in that kind of a cycle where it's like I wake up earlier, but then I also go to bed later. And that doesn't work out quite so well for the anxiety and the stress. But as long as I go to bed earlier and I wake up earlier, I find that this has a massive difference on that overwhelm, which typically for me, overwhelm is kind of like the trigger point for eventually producing more anxiety in my body. And at the end of the day, it can be something as simple as like, you know, we talk about action alleviates anxiety. Well, if I can get done, you know, 1 to 2 things from my kind of big 3 or just from my to-do list in general before 7 a.m., I feel like a superhero. I'm like, man, I am already winning this day. I am just crushing it. And so it's like completely mental at that point, but it really does make a huge difference. Number 4 is thought downloads. So this is something I've talked about in the past. If you've listened to the episodes where I interviewed my mindset coach, Leslie Crevar, we talk about this a little bit. And I've also done another episode where we talk about emotional regulation. And I talked a little bit about thought downloads there. But this is where essentially I just grab a notebook, or even honestly, most of the time I just do it on the Notes app in my phone. And I just get all the thoughts that are spinning around and swirling around in my head. I just write them down. So like, for example, on Saturday night, so again, we were still in Nashville. This was the last night there. And I found myself really starting to spiral again. And so I just took some time like in the hotel room and just pulled up my Notes app. And I just started because I think for women, a lot of times it's easier to identify how you're feeling than what you're thinking. So personally, I like to start by just labeling all the emotions that I'm like experiencing or that I feel like I've been experiencing lately. Because like in the moment, you might only be experiencing one emotion, but if you think about kind of where you've been in the last 24 to 48 hours, that's kind of like gotten you to this point, it can be really helpful for me to start by just saying, okay, what are all the emotions I've been feeling? Get all those down. Then I actually take a step back. I'm like, okay, if these are the feelings I've been experiencing, the emotions I've been experiencing, what are the thoughts that have ultimately been causing these emotions and feelings? And so I'll kind of list out like different circumstances, different factual things that happened and my thoughts about those things. So like going back to, you know, when I was in the hotel room and I, you know, said, I'm not coming down to do the expert panel. I was, of course, having all these thoughts about it that were creating emotions. So I write that out. What exactly was the thought that I was experiencing? And just like having a child who maybe is acting out because they want to get your attention, a lot of times these thoughts, we just need to give them some airtime. We just need to actually spend some time looking at the thoughts themselves rather than letting them like spin around in our head over and over again, or trying to tell ourselves, just forget that thought, just like let it go. Sometimes we kind of need to like sit with the thought a little bit, and the best way to do so is to visually look at it, write it down in a full sentence form, and just look at it and actually spend some time with it. And that can be incredibly helpful. It might, in the moment, some of the thoughts might be uncomfortable and it might bring up some more tears and different things like that, but it does have a very therapeutic effect.
Well, if you think about it too, like what's the opposite of not doing something like that and just keep continuing to like, you know,
pushing it down.
Yeah. And it eventually comes up and blows up in your face.
Yeah. I always like to say, you know, trying to like push those thoughts down and trying to ignore them and trying just to like to change them, different things like jumping to that. It's a lot like if you're in a pool and you have a beach ball and you're trying to push the beach ball under the water. that thing is just going to keep popping back up from other places. So it's like we have to kind of give it some airtime and spend some time and just bring some awareness to what is ultimately happening, kind of like what's happening in our bodies, in our brains, and that in and of itself can be incredibly soothing. Number 5, now getting into a little bit more of like the more tactical type of like nutrition type of things. I focus on eating regularly and focus on eating nutrient dense meals. So like when I'm anxious and overwhelmed, the last thing I want is to now add like a blood sugar roller coaster on top of it. And the reality is anxiety itself does cause a little bit more blood sugar spikes because kind of, breaking down the science very quickly here, basically, you're going to have that rush of cortisol, that rush of norepinephrine, and that is going to trigger your body to release glucose. It's going to trigger your body to also crave glucose a little bit more. So ultimately, you're going to find yourself with a little bit more of a propensity for blood sugar spikes and crashes, which is going to spiral, adding more anxiety, more of those physiological feelings in our body that contribute to the anxiety. So for myself, I aim to, and this is something just in general across the board, another reason that I recommend this is eating, that kind of having like a nutrient dense meal early when you first wake up, within 30 to 60 minutes of waking up, have like a good breakfast with 30 grams of protein. That helps just set your body up for success with blood sugar. And in doing so, that can help mitigate anxiety later in the day.
And the other thing, I mean, for me, I'm like, I know if I'm feeling mentally crappy, eating a meal that's going to make me feel bloated or make me feel even shittier physically, I mean, that's mental plus physical. You're like, oh my God, this just sucks. And I think
it just like gives you more reasons to be anxious.
Right.
And a lot of times, like the anxiety, again, it's going to come from so many different places. Now you're going to start to find more reasons to feel anxious. And so you're going to add to that list if you're like, oh my gosh, and I've just been eating terribly and this is so terrible. Like you're going to feel more down about yourself. So like, especially, through those couple of days in Nashville, that was one thing that I basically used as like an anchor point, was like, I am staying on top of my nutrition because I know that if I let go of my nutrition right now, I'm just going to completely fall apart even more than I already have. So that was something I really held on to. Number 6 is drinking soothing teas. So peppermint tea and chamomile tea are kind of my go-tos if I'm feeling a little bit more stressed, a little bit more anxious, different things like that. Peppermint tea especially because, when you are in a little bit more of an anxious state, you might find that your stomach gets a little bit more upset. You start to have a little bit more of like just tummy issues. I felt that as well on like Friday and Saturday too. And so thankfully I always pack peppermint tea when I travel. And so I leaned on that a little bit. I hadn't brought any chamomile tea with me at the time, but that's something I also like to turn to in general to kind of help mitigate these things. And then the last one, number 7, is drink plenty of fluids and electrolytes. So in general, I'm always on top of at least, one kind of electrolyte packet per day. I like Element is my go-to. But the reality is when we are in a more anxious state, we're going to really, really need to double down on our fluids and our electrolytes. So when you are anxious, you are essentially going to cause, again, there's so many physiological reactions that are happening in this type of situation. And so your body is going to be depleting your sodium and magnesium and potassium stores at a much higher rate. So we need to replenish those stores or else you're adding more stress to the body. So that's why making sure that we are replenishing with electrolytes, with lots of fluids, lots of water, that's going to really help balance and support your nervous system as a whole. So those are my kind of 7 go-to healthy habits that I try my best to really bring back in if I find myself leaning towards more anxiety. But these are the things that I try and do just across the board to kind of help keep things in a great spot, keep things at bay. So, I mean, how did I go wrong with that stuff last week? Well, again, let's go back to what I had said at the beginning here. Pre-travel, we were pushing really hard. I was telling myself at that point in time that I am just too busy, quote unquote, to go, get in a cold plunge, go to the sauna, go for a walk outside. Like I was cutting those things out of my schedule because I just did not believe I had time for them. That right there was a poor choice. And I, looking back retroactively, can see that ultimately led to a little bit of that downward spiral. I also, again, was not on a very regular sleep schedule. We were staying up later. I was getting up earlier. And just over the course of time, like I was also up and down with when I was going to bed and when I was waking up. It was not consistent. That also is going to be a little bit upsetting for the nervous system. And then I was not on top of my meal schedule quite as much as I could be. So like I was saying there on that last point in terms of the nutrient dense foods, I was really, really intentional on that trip with making sure what I was eating was very nutrient dense. I was really on top of my protein intake, my veggies, but I was not as on top of my timing of meals. And part of that was because when you kind of get to that state of anxiety and depression, you don't really want to eat a lot of times. And you kind of just like, for me, I just wanted to stay in bed and I didn't really feel like a physiological desire to eat food. And I wasn't taking the time to remind myself to. So I was going for longer periods of time without eating, which definitely contributed to things as well. So at the end of the day, I hope that those tips are helpful for anybody who struggles with these types of things. But the thing that I also want to add that wasn't necessarily on this list, but I think is really, really important for anybody who really resonates with anything I've said on this episode, I think one of the most important things is to give yourself grace, give yourself permission to rest, and don't shame yourself for it. Don't guilt yourself for it. That was something I had to do while I was there. And I really think that helped me get back to that state of normal once I returned home much faster because physiologically I was getting my energy back because I was resting. You know, my brain definitely didn't always like it. I was definitely telling myself stories about, how I'm being rude and nobody likes me and, all the different things that, come up like, oh, nobody cares if I'm not around anyway. Like we start to tell ourselves stories and that's where the mind management has to come in. But, I'll leave you with this. So there was a quote I actually came up across on Friday that really, really resonated hard. And this is by Young Pueblo. And he says, progress is being aware when there's a storm happening inside of you and remaining calm as it passes by. You can't control the darkness that comes, but you can always control how you react to it. So if you find yourself kind of in that state, you're in the darkness, you're in the storm, just remind yourself that like it will pass. You will not be in that state forever. And all you can do is control how you react to it and how you take care of yourself, how you treat yourself. So that's my story for today, you guys.
All right, you guys, thanks so much for listening to us. If this was helpful, please share it with somebody or anybody that you feel like is going through something like this. Or if you enjoy the episode, just share it on your social media channels so that we can continue to reach to people and continue to help as many people as possible. But we'll be back next week.
Thanks, you guys.